What do you think of when you hear the word continuous? If you're a developer, you might think about your continuous integration and continuous delivery pipeline. If you're in DevOps, maybe continuous testing and continuous monitoring come to mind. If you're compliance, maybe you think about continuous audit. But where's the security? All too often, security is left out of these loops. It's considered a final checkbox activity, an annual assessment. Some organizations treat security like, well, we deployed an endpoint solution, got our pen test, got a ROC, done for the year. Or they may say that they're one and done, one background check before hire, one IDS box that's deployed and forgotten, checkbox security. But we all know that security isn't the last step. Security is everyone, everywhere, every time. We need to include security in all phases, not just at the end. Fixing problems at the end is costly, but when we shift left our security controls, when we move them to earlier in the development process, we find problems sooner and fixing them is easier. In PCI Standards, continuous processes are part of making security business as usual. It's baked directly into many PCI DSS requirements and encouraged as good practice and many more. It's about ensuring our security controls continue to operate correctly as a normal course of business. But again, I'm sure you all know this, which is why today I'm going to talk about these concepts and contrast them with an organization that was less than successful with their security controls. Now, this presentation draws heavily from the details of an actual breach that occurred years ago. The organization in question is a well-known theme park that fell victim to industrial espionage. The CEO claimed to have spared no expense in creating the most advanced amusement park with all the latest technology. But the truth is that security was not part of this organization's DNA, and it was not ingrained in the company culture as business as usual. And as you all know, even the most expensive technology doesn't guarantee security without robust, repeatable processes and procedures. Now, because this case is based on an actual incident, I will not be using the name of the company. For the purpose of this presentation, I will refer to them as Dinosaur Park. Now, although the incident did not involve cardholder data, their information systems were breached, leading to the loss of valuable industrial secrets and property. Some of you might already be familiar with this incident. Much of the information I'm presenting comes from a documentary about the breach, legal documents, and leaked images from the park's video surveillance system. We'll go step by step through the attack and see how PCI controls and continuous processes could have made a difference. This is Dennis Nedry. He is the primary suspect in the criminal investigation. He's a programmer and self-professed tech wizard and allegedly a malicious insider. Authorities suspect that because of financial problems, he engaged in industrial espionage, selling the park's most valuable assets, data and dinosaur embryos, to a competitor. He allegedly overcame the park's logical and physical security controls to smuggle the goods out of the park. His current whereabouts are unknown. Now, Nedry is a developer, and so the first part of his plan is to write malware to disable the park's security systems, like cameras, gates, logging, phones. He told the park staff that some systems would go offline while he was recompiling. He then sneaked into a restricted area and stole some dinosaur embryos before driving out the front gate with them. So let's point out some of the security failures here. He started out by writing some malware and pushing it directly into production with no oversight or documentation. That's a few failures just on its own. The PCI DSS requires that changes be reviewed, documented, approved, and tested. It requires separate environments for production and pre-production systems. Compiling code in a developer environment should never take down production systems, much less security systems. The PCI DSS requires separate job roles for production and pre-production systems and code review for any code being deployed. He should not have been able to write applications and just push them into production alone. Organizations with a continuous integration and continuous deployment, or CI/CD pipeline, can automate controls to prevent these problems and ensure security checks happen for every code change. Continuous integration allows you to build security gates to protect every step in the process. Automated vulnerability scans, automated tests for coding or configuration errors, unit tests, making sure all your pull requests are only approved if no vulnerabilities are present, deploying only if all security tests pass 100%. By ensuring that security starts with the code and is tested before and after deployment, you can build an end-to-end security throughout a CI/CD process. Now, the PCI DSS comes with requirement options and guidance that encourage this. For example, in this incident, a simple anti-malware scan might not have detected Nedry's custom Trojan horse. But if you combine that with a post-deployment continuous behavioral analysis, you might be able to detect even zero-day threats. After running his malware, Nedry's next step was to physically steal the embryos from a vault. Now, this high-security area has controls that are more comparable with the PCI card production standard, which also includes requirements for protecting a vault, but in this case filled with card products. The park has locked doors, cameras, and even a sally port for vehicles. They've developed a lot of technology, but in the end it's useless because it's not supported by processes. Nedry's malware disabled all logging. He disabled the cameras. He disabled the door locks. And then comes the worst news. This isn't even the first time he's done this. An accomplice later testified that Nedry actually ran the malware and accessed the vault during a trial run of the heist. So this means that all of the park's controls failed before, and no one noticed during or after the fact. PCI card production has requirements that call for guards to monitor the video cameras. And if the CCTV video is lost, the system has to make an audible alarm that guards will respond to. As soon as the door locks failed, the guards would have investigated, and they would have detected the attack while it happens. But more than that, the card production lays out proactive testing of its security controls. This is a form of continuous audit, where the entity is testing their own controls for defects and failures. Every month, a card production site tests its own cameras, external lighting, and alarm batteries. Every 3 months, they're testing duress buttons and alarms on external doors. Continuous controls monitoring assures their controls function before, during, and after any attacks. The investigation revealed weaknesses in access control processes as well. Part of a zero-trust architecture is following the principle of least privilege. And when a breach occurs, that way the scope of the breach is limited. PCI DSS Requirement 7 applies this principle, but once again, it can't be a one-time event. For instance, in this incident, Nedry clearly had too much access to systems and areas. He had full access to all the IT systems and a vault with genetic material, even though his position didn't call for it. Of course, over time, users' access needs can change and evolve, especially when they change roles. But that access must still be limited to only what is necessary for their position, which is why their access should be reviewed as part of continuous audit. The PCI DSS added this explicitly, and it now calls for user access reviews every 6 months. And the process of changing users' role or department should also include a reevaluation of their access as a best practice. Ideally, these role changes should also trigger another protective measure: screening to identify risks from insiders. Additional screening could have identified Nedry as a disgruntled employee with financial problems. Now, strangely, in this case, management actually didn't know about these issues, but didn't take any steps to address them. But we'll talk about management's role in just a bit. Unfortunately, Nedry was successful in his theft of company secrets and property, and so far he has not been apprehended. But how did the park respond to this attack? Well, first, they didn't even discover the attack until after the death of a park guest. They were not reviewing logs or responding to security alerts until after the breach. The PCI DSS requires daily automated log reviews. But for better security, we should continuously monitor real-time user and device behavior and use a SIM, a security information and event management tool, to analyze logs and identify threats. The park's incident response was obviously ad hoc. They were just making this up. They actually included park guests in the response team, which was necessary after the last IT administrator had been dismembered and eaten. The PCI DSS requires a detailed incident response plan, which is tested every year. But for an incident response team to be effective, they should be tested and receive training every year. Now, in this case, it's up to the organization to decide what level of continuous fits them, because the PCI DSS says to perform a targeted risk analysis, or TRA, to determine how often the training is needed. TRAs help organizations determine the optimum frequency of their security controls based on their threats and environment. But the results of a TRA are unlikely to be, let's just do it once. Their disaster recovery wasn't any better. They didn't have a plan. In fact, one administrator said, "We've never shut down the entire system before. It might not come back on at all." But perhaps the most alarming part of all of this are the implications about the staff's attitude about security. For security to be a continuous process, you have to have the people on board. You need a security-first culture where people are allowed to stand up and say, "We can't move forward on this until we've considered the security concerns," where employees feel empowered to raise an alert if necessary. So what did the Bayerkohler Park staff do here? When Nedry said he was pushing out changes on his own, no one batted an eye. When the door security systems went offline, they just shrugged and said, "Well, Nedry did say a few systems would go offline, didn't he?" This is a culture of security negligence. Security wasn't a concern, and everyone from the staff to the management knew it. Which brings us to management's role in security processes. We're protecting the identity of the CEO here because they were legally absolved from liability concerning the unfortunate events at the park. But does this sound familiar to anyone? A CEO that, quote, hates inspections. They slow everything down. Leadership that only adds security after a serious accident occurs. Management team that only does an external audit when their insurance company demands it. This company had problems from the top down. But what should they have done? First, overall accountability for compliance should have been assigned to an individual or a team with communication to executive management. Their attention and care sets the tone for the organization, creates a culture of security. Second, they should have implemented continuous audit techniques. And for me, nothing drives this home as well as PCI DSS 12.4.2, which mandates that service providers perform their own internal security reviews every 3 months to determine if security policies and procedures are being followed. They must take responsibility for their controls and verify that business as usual tasks are taking place. This, combined with 10.7.3, demands a mature methodology for verifying security controls and responding to failures of security systems on a regular basis. Internalizing security. And third, they really needed backup power to their Velociraptor cages. Now, one of those requirements is only for service providers, but it's still a best practice for merchants as well. And it comes with the added benefit of generating and gathering evidence that should make annual assessments that much easier. For Dinosaur Park, security was a final addition that they just tacked on when pressured by insurance. And the result was they ended up with no real security at all. But we can all take away some lessons about the importance of security in our day-to-day activities. Bruce Schneier famously said, "Security is a process, not a product." But don't tell anyone in the vendor showcase that I said that. Security is everyone, everywhere, every time. And when we include security in our daily practices, compliance follows naturally. As a side note, Dinosaur Park's new CEO released a statement saying, "We deeply regret the mistakes made during the opening of the park. We've learned valuable lessons, and our renewed commitment to innovation and security will ensure our new upcoming park sets a new benchmark for safety." I guess we'll just have to see how that turns out. Thank you.